I'm Liam Billingham.
I'm George Frigopoulos.
And this
is
Ghostbusters 2. This is Oeuvre Busters. Save the day! Myself and my friend Kevin Candardo, who used to host a great podcast called No Holds Barred. Shout out to that. You used to listen to it. When I moved in with him in Astoria, Queens.
What? Represent.
We almost spent several $100s on several $1,000s on one of the original Vigo the Carpathian paintings. Like, we were really close to buying it. I think it would have cost us a couple $1,000.
How high and or drunk were you
Well,
both?
no, we were like, literally, I was like temping in Boston and he was in New York, and he was like, I got to go home and measure the specs in our new place to make sure we can get it inside. We might have to, like, I don't know where we're going to put it once we get it in there, but like, I'm into this. And I was like, me too, buddy. Let's get this thing. So there you go.
And it's wow. Do you think you can still get one?
I don't know. Let's not do that now because we have a show to do. George.
Oh yeah, I guess we do have a show. We're not just shooting the shit.
Yorgos. Can I call you Yorgos?
You can call me Yorgos. Yeah, why not?
You can call me Yorgos Fragopoulos, motherfucker. What movie are we talking about?
Liam, we're talking about 1955's I Live in Fear. Ooh, or
also called Record of a Living Being. Record of a Living Being. What title? I really like that title.
So touching. Yeah, it does it works for me.
Cool. Good stuff.
Thumbs up.
1955, directed by Akira Kurosawa and starring Toshiro Mifune. George, what happens in Record of a Living Being?
So Liam, or as I like to call it, I Live in Fear, tells the story of Kichi Nakajima, an elderly found...
Kichi.
Sorry.
Been meaning to run you through a Japanese pronunciation.
Yeah, I mean,
program.
I could get lessons, right, and write them off. He's an elderly foundry owner who lives in fear, hence the title, or is just a living being, hence the other title, who lives in constant existential fear of another nuclear attack occurring at any given moment. As such, Nakajima decides to move his family to Brazil, where he buys like a huge and exorbitant plot of land. His existential fear leads to his family trying to get him declared incompetent, so that way they get to protect the family business and their money and their inheritance. Nakajima is called before a court tribunal, which is actually kind of where the film begins, where we are introduced to Dr. Harada, who is this kind of court mediator, who is like a citizen who is kind of tasked with basically working alongside the lawyers and the judges to declare whether or not Nakajima is in fact incompetent and insane. And he kind of becomes our one-man Greek chorus for the entirety of the action. So the film basically kind of is a slow boil till the very, very end, where there's a lot of this tension between the family, a lot of domestic kind of drama about whether or not the family will move to Brazil. Is the father... And
some infighting among the various mistresses and children that he has.
There's a lot of domestic drama, and basically just about whether or not this man is in fact kind of insane, or if perhaps he's the only sane man around. Eventually he destroys his own foundry in order to kind of force his family to move from Japan. And the film ends in a really, really sad way with Nakajima in a kind of mental hospital, clearly in a kind of deranged state, and he's visited by Harada, and this is where also there's this kind of conversation between Harada and another doctor. Harada is a dentist in his day job. Harada. And
always hit that first syllable, I think.
I gotta nail it. And basically...
Okay. I love you.
I love you too, Liam. And basically, they have this conversation about like, well, maybe he's not insane, and maybe we're all insane. And if the film ends with Harada basically... having one more kind of weird discussion with the deranged Nakajima, who is clearly not there. The end.
Film was produced by Sojiro Motoki. It was written by Akira Kurosawa, Shinobu Hashimoto, and Hideo Agune. The music was by Masaru Sato and Fumio Hayazaka. And the film was produced and distributed by Toho. The cast. So there's a lot of people in this movie. You can look it up, and I'm going to give you what I'm trying to do now with our cast listings is to hit on the people that we see again and again in Akira Kurosawa movies in the hope that maybe that will persuade some discussion. Toshiro Mifune plays Kichi Nakajima. Takashi Shimura plays Dr. Harada. Minoru Chiaki, who we may all remember from Seven Samurai and The Idiot, plays Jiro Nakajima. Noriku Sengoku, who kind of hasn't been in as much lately, but appeared in a big role in The Quiet Duel, and Stray Dog appears as Kimi Nakajima. It's a really fascinating part. She's the one who kind of has very little to say in the film. And Iko Miyoshi, who is the older woman that appears in literally every Akira Kurosawa film, who's wonderful, plays Toyo Nakajima, the first wife to Mifune's Kichi Nakajima. A couple quick things about the film. The title of the film actually translates to Record of a Living Being. Maybe we can talk about the significance of that. And, I think from the film, so the film didn't get released until 1971, and it was Kurosawa's first box office failure. I think the big takeaway from this, and I think this is maybe something that's interesting to talk about, but I feel as though, there was a significant amount of testing of bombs in the Pacific post-World War II. Mm-hmm. And radioactive rainstorms were a thing that happened. And Japan was perfectly situated to absorb radiation because of the currents and the way that the winds moved. And so in 1954, a year before I Live in Fear was shot, the United States tested a hydrogen bomb on Bikini Atoll in the Pacific. The fallout cloud, which spread across an area of 7,000 square miles, drifted over a Japanese fishing boat called Lucky Dragon No. 7 and covered 23 crewmen with radioactive ash. I feel as though sometimes here in the US of A, when we talk about the 1940s, well, first of all, when we talk about the 1940s, it's all, and then we won the war and everything was fine. But I think we never talk about how palpable the fear of atomic war was. I mean, certainly it was a part of our upbringing when they talk about, what was it like when you hid under the desk?
Yeah.
There was going to be, that kind of thing.
The Cold War, yeah.
The Cold War stuff, of course. But I feel like we very rarely talk about that, at least as raised in the suburbs of Boston, as the long-term traumatic impact that had on a psyche, the psyche of an entire nation.
Yes, I would agree with
a big takeaway from that.
Well, I mean, but that's just kind of American history, that there's never an acceptance of the violence that we enact on other people or other cultures.
What do you mean? What are you talking about, bro? We don't do that.
So
everything
I mean,
is super chill.
I agree with you there, but it's funny you should say that, because I do remember growing up and being young, and the first time I remember, being 7 or 8 and hearing about nuclear war, nuclear weapons, and having a rational, irrational fear about it. I remember till it was 10 or 11. I'd sometimes just think oh my God, there could be a nuclear war and everybody would die. And then I saw Dr. Strangelove and made me feel a lot better about everything.
Well, it's interesting because I think that relates to, this is a real, so what do you think? What did you think of the movie?
So I'm glad I saw it. I enjoyed it, although enjoy is a very, I guess, nuanced word. I'm glad I saw it.
Well, it's not like a Led Zeppelin song.
It's definitely not.
It's complicated.
It's not
right?
even.
Sure.
Yeah, it's not even the later
a Pink Floyd song.
Yeah. I'm just trying to think
Fool in the Rain.
What's the weakest Led Zeppelin album? Led Zeppelin 2?
4? 2 is good. Doesn't 2 have a whole lot of love in it?
4 has Stairway. And
I'm confusing 2 and 4.
I'm pretty sure Black
This is so
Dog's
stupid.
on that.
This is so
and Rock and Roll.
Rock and Roll.
Yeah.
Hey, mama said the way you move. That one. Black Dog.
Gonna make you groove. I think isn't that Black Dog? No, Rock and Roll is like. Rock and roll.
Man, Led Zeppelin kind of rocks. Forget what I said earlier.
I told you, yeah.
I'm exhausted by them.
So it's not my favorite Kurosawa. And there was something about it that struck me as a little bit too melodramatic. Having also said that, I fucking think this is one of Mifune's best performances.
Oh, this is really, it's okay. So okay, here's the thing. Every movie Akira Kurosawa made on some level is a banger.
True.
Like, it's hard to
So
deny.
far,
Like,
yes.
that's the thing that's weird, is it's not like we're gonna, and also we're not gonna enter a period as we did in the last season where we're like, oh cool, now we have to watch 3 like DC extended universe
Well,
movies.
he did
Last
weirdly
season-
make
last
a
season
Hulk
is a
movie
blip.
in the 70s, which is just didn't really
That was
work.
totally weird. Yeah.
Yeah.
But I really like this movie. It was my second time seeing it. I don't know that I think you're wrong about it being melodramatic, but I also think it has some pretty profound things to say about life that feel very contemporary. In terms of, well, I think, it's interesting that you mentioned at some point in your life being scared of like nuclear war because you heard about it. Or like at some point maybe in our lives, like being anxious about, I don't know, when I remember like having a conversation with a friend during in 2004, 2003, when all of a sudden when we were lawfully entering another war in the Middle East and being like, remember every time it happens, there's conversations about drafts. There's just all of these like weird, palpable things that seem scary in life. And so, thinking back on that stuff, thinking about nuclear war, thinking about war in general, I remember watching the bombing of Belgrade in 91 and with my family and being like, what does this mean? All that to say that, like, I think it unearths and discusses like the anxiety of modern life in very powerful ways and believable ways. And watching it while still in what feels like a never-ending quarantine ish, well, for some of us, feels like an interesting time to watch it, and it feels extra resonant in that regard.
Yeah, I think it does. See, I mean, maybe it doesn't do that for me. Maybe its sense of anxiety and fear to me, even though I think Mifune does a good job of channeling it, and I guess maybe obviously like that, I guess that's part of the film, right? That in a certain way he's on this island by himself. That the people around him, obviously only like a decade after the fact, are for the most part like, it happened, whatever, it's in the past, like, what are you worried about, like, it's done.
That's interesting.
But it didn't fill me with that kind of dread. And I wonder if that's just because of my naivety and thinking like, oh yeah, like that shit's all in the past. Like I'm not so like, at least consciously, I'm not naive to think that it's that.
You're pretty naive.
I mean, I'm you know what it is? I'm a romantic Liam.
Yeah.
I believe in the best.
Yeah, you are.
Best in all people. But
of course. Yeah, that's really you pegged down
that's
to
really
it. Yeah,
me.
that's really you. Exactly. Yeah.
But that I think that
you have nothing but faith in people.
Nothing but faith. Yeah, it didn't convey to me. It didn't do, I think, a good job of conveying to me Mifune's existential dread. Although watching it again now for the second time, I also picked up a little bit more on those scenes where Takashi Shimura's character does also express a certain kind of the same anxiety, but is just in some sort of way, again, like able to maybe not rationalize through his fear, but to just kind of be like, yeah, maybe this guy has like a point. Like we all, because there's that one scene where he said we all us Japanese have this anxiety. It's palpable. We know what it's like. One
of the things, excuse me.
You're excused.
One of the things that I think this movie that doesn't come off so clearly the first time you watch it, I feel as though when I watched this film for the first time, maybe 10 years ago. And I remember, that's the movie where Mifune plays an old guy. And because we're watching these films at the rate that we're watching them, and because when you decide to watch a 6 to 16 films directed by Akira Kurosawa and featuring Toshiro Mifune, you're also essentially watching 16 films starring Takashi Shimura. Mm-hmm. And so he's kind of become, I mean, we're doing an episode about Ikiru. He's become sort of the secondary focus. And in some ways, the thing that I'm paying as much attention to as the others. And this is the second film we've discussed where he plays an older man in a contemporary society in which he doesn't... In Ikiru, it's very clear from the beginning that he's alienated from his society. In I Live in Fear, I feel as though it sneaks up on him. He's kind of content with his dentist business. Interesting that they choose to make him a dentist because, like, historically, dentists are, like, the most depressed people I've heard. Like, it's just interesting. But he's, like, a dentist.
Wait.
He has a business with his family.
Historically, dentists are the most depressed
Well, there's
people.
there's this whole, like, theory
joke.
online that, like, dentists are just... I have a friend who, his dad is a dentist, and he once was like, oh, my dad's a dentist. He's a depressed person. Like, dentists are depressed people. I don't know if it's true, but, like, it's a very specific choice. He kind of, like, goes off to this hearing doing his civic duty because he's, like, well recognized in the society at the time, or, like, well regarded. And I think it kind of creates this crack in the fabric of how he's able to process life. And I think that brings up, it's an interesting thing to view him as the central character of the film, because I do believe he's the character who changes the most in the course of the film, and that he ends at the beginning of the film, he's sort of like, oh, well, the kids are right, meaning Mifune's kids, like, we live in a different society. The world has quote unquote changed. What do we have to worry about? And by the end of the film, he's in the mental hospital, so to speak, with Mifune. And he's like, who's the crazy one? I don't know who's crazy anymore. So on that level, it feels as though the film thematically is touching on a few things. It's touching on, like, post-World War II industrialization, corporatization, westernization of Japan. And it's also touching on what I think is a somewhat subtle critique of patriarchal roles in a society.
Yes. Well, say a little bit more about that, because I mean, obviously, again, there's always, it seems like with, again, Kurosawa, there's always this kind of intergenerational tension.
Yes.
But I didn't try to map it out this time around, in part because also, I think by the end of the film, you're supposed to kind of, if not be entirely on Mifune's side, at least sympathize with him. But I guess you're right. It could be both. Like, obviously, it could be a critique. Well, I'm just kind of thinking about it now.
I think you can be both. I mean, I think we're all sympathetic to our people in our lives who are older than us and still disagree with the ways and customs that they choose to do things, right?
Sure.
Like, well, I mean, like, I think the film can be both sympathetic and, quietly critical.
So what does it say then about these patriarchal figures?
I just think it depends. I think you're right. I think it depends on where you feel the film lies in terms of its sympathies. I think it's sympathetic towards them. I think it's interesting that on this sort of panel of civic judges, I don't know how to describe exactly their role. It's 3 older men and 1 woman who's a stenographer.
Yeah.
Who basically has nothing to say. I just think that's it's interesting that Kurosawa chose to include that. Now, that could as much be a reflection of the roles of people at the time.
Totally, yeah.
But it feels intentional, and there's very little that Kurosawa does that doesn't feel pretty accurate.
But I would say that's also probably, I would say that has to be, okay. I could be wrong, but that has to be a historical fact, or more like a likelihood rather than a
statement.
Yeah, I mean, even like, you know, even within like the American context, obviously that would have been like, it still is in many respects still like where you would obviously you walk like the halls of like power, whatever they might be, politically speaking, you'll typically find white dudes rather than other kinds of people. So like that didn't seem to me like a necessarily like a critique. I think if the critique, if there's a critique to be had, it's going to be obviously about Mifune's character.
So let's get there. I just want to say one thing in response to that. I think that maybe then that's something that I was looking for as a viewer in the film. Because I also think increasingly one thing I've learned from all these rewatches is, as you pointed out, the fact that Kurosawa seems to always be making films about intergenerational relationships. And I think many times sometimes his surrogate, I think in the early films, his surrogate might be Mifune, but in some of these films, I think his surrogate is Shimura.
Yeah, that's fair.
And in 1955, Akira Kurosawa would have been... Let's guess Akira Kurosawa's age.
In 1955?
Yeah, how old do you think he was? I know, because I'm... Guess.
41.
45.
Close.
So he's entering into middle age.
Okay.
So maybe that's something that again, as a viewer, I was looking for in the film. Let's hear. I'd like to hear more about how you think that Mifune's role could be a critique.
Well, it's a critique, obviously, if you take him to be this person who's driven by irrationality, and who then uses, again, his place in the family to basically destroy the rest of their lives. Especially, obviously, by burning down the foundry. By destroying the foundry, he kind of, if not completely and utterly destroys their lives, he does wreck their lives. So that there's this sense of like, well, I'm living under this kind of existential ennui. I can't acclimate myself to this new age, to this new era. I'm taking all you motherfuckers down with me because you're not willing to make the transition with me to a different place, which is Brazil. Obviously, if I didn't say that in the film notes, right?
Yeah, he's planning to move to Brazil. Yeah, what's great in audio is silent consideration. When you're like, maybe you should narrate it.
Liam is erotically touching his lips while he's trying to erotically bring a thought to his mind. Now he is erotically taking a sip of water, and now also erotically laughing. Now he's erotically taking off his shirt.
No, that's where it ends.
I have to stop. Keep going on. I mean, I think again, it's just this thing of like, how does it that you, and it could obviously be both, but it's like, what is it that you make of the destruction of the foundry? And it's very kind of Lear-esque.
Tell me more about that. We did spend some time this week talking about another Shakespeare. So keep going.
Another Shakespeare.
Another tomorrow and tomorrow and
John
tomorrow
Gielgud
creeps in this petty pace from day to day to the last syllable of recorded time.
But of course.
And all our yesterdays have lighted fools the way to dusty death.
Yes.
Out, brief shadow. Out, brief candle.
Brief candle.
Life's but a walking shadow, a poor player that struts and frets his hour upon the stage and then is heard no more. It is a tale told by an idiot. Full of sound and fury.
Yeah. It's a tale told by a fucking idiot. This fall on Broadway.
Hey, guess who studied the classics in college?
James Gandolfini does Shakespeare. To be or not to fucking be, Christopher. What the fuck? Coming soon on Broadway.
This fall. Bum, 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 bum. Tony Soprano is going back to school. What do I gotta read this for? Midsummer Night's Dream?
Books are fucking lame. Where's the fucking kegger?
I'll watch the movie. It's got Christian Bale in it.
We should do a fucking panty raid. Tony Soprano in Back to School.
Why is it still that sad narrator?
I don't know. It's like a Merchant Ivory narrator. Oh man!
All right, where were we?
So many good people dead.
Interesting that you bring up
Lear.
Yeah, go talk more about that.
Just about this idea of what happens when a patriarch decides to pass something on to an heir, or the demands, let's say, that again an older generation makes on the younger generation in terms of, let's say, transferring over power, which also I think is really fucking interesting to think about our current political situation. Especially to watch these 95-year-old men whose minds are clearly just at the twilight of their power, trying to debate one another.
I think one is clearly at their twilight, and but the other is I'm feeling a little bit better about, like a little bit better. But yes, there is something very timely about the way that the patriarchal figure in this movie chooses to destroy everything that has been built because he doesn't like the way things are.
Because there's also there's lots of him saying some version of, I built this, it's mine to do with what I please. And that also begs the question of to what degree are his kids in any sort of way sincere about like actually taking care of him because they think there's something wrong with him, or because they're just like, no, we want the fucking money. Got to secure that bag.
I think another way that this film is incredibly timely is that we're not dealing with just the mental facility of our current White House occupant notwithstanding. We're not dealing with a character in this film who is right of mind.
Mm-hmm.
We think, potentially. And one of the tragic, quiet things about this film is being a member of a family where you know that the person who's making the decisions, the person in power, the person who sort of brings the whole family together. And in this case, it's not just the immediate family. He also has two mistresses who have children. And one of the mistress's fathers is kind of this like money craven guy. But there's something really, I think, if you've ever dealt with it, tragic about watching a patriarchal figure who's maybe potentially out of their mind, and having to figure out what to do about them. And so for me, I actually am not terribly sympathetic towards Mifune's character in this film. I'm very sympathetic to the family, and I'm very specifically sympathetic to Minoru Chiaki, who plays Jiro. Minoru Chiaki played in The Seven Samurai. He played, hang on, which is the... Vamp, George, Vamp.
Liam is erotically Googling for an answer.
In Seven Samurai, he played Hihachi Hayashida. He's the sort of inexperienced samurai.
The young guy, yeah.
And in Ikiru, he plays Noguchi, and he is in, as well, Rashomon as the priest.
As the priest. Oh, as the priest, okay.
Yeah. So he's like, sort of this, he has a little bit of the Shimura in him, in that he's kind of has like an everyman character. And I find him very, very sympathetic in this film, because I think he is trying to do what's best and looking the problem directly in the face. And like the mother kind of doesn't want to, which is understandable. And he doesn't, I don't know, he seems to want to secure the family business because he doesn't want them all to get fucked.
Right.
I just don't have a lot of sympathy towards Mifune in the film. I don't.
Oh, I disagree. I mean, I think like, again, there's the portray, like, again, that he, like I said, like, I think his portrayal of this existential ennui or crisis is palpable, but for me, it didn't suck me in enough, or at least like the overall impression. If the film, I guess that's another kind of interesting question. Like, was the film, which I would say probably was, meant to convey this overwhelming sense of anxiety? And there's like one scene, like there's that one scene where he hears those planes flying overhead.
No, it's great.
And he has like that flashback, and he like jumps on his like grandchild to protect them, to protect the child.
The baby starts to scream. It's not his grand. That's his child.
Oh, that's his child. Sorry.
Yeah, that part's a little confusing. He's holding the baby, and you think it's his daughter, but it's actually his mistress.
It's his mistress. Yeah,
and the other guy is her father. And it is a little confusing. And
that there's this sense of like, yeah, that scene worked very well for me. Like,
it's a good scene.
Yeah, it's a great scene.
One of the most
and you get
striking scenes in the film.
You get that flash of lights as well.
Right, because of the lightning strike.
Yeah. And I guess we're supposed to also assume we're not entirely sure if the planes are actually there, right? That the entire thing might be entirely in his head.
I never really thought about that, but I think that's a totally fair reading of that.
Because his mistress looks at him like, "What the fuck are you doing?"
When he scares the baby, and it's hard to watch. I think that's what a great segue to talk about the performance of Toshiro Mifune.
One might say it's an erotic segue. Sorry, what was that?
Are you a fan of the performance?
Yeah, of course. And he does like such a good job of inhabiting the, like an old person's body. Like he walks around with a cane. He's kind of like a little bit hunched over. He's clearly, I don't think he gained weight, but he's clearly kind of strapped with some kind of belly enhancing equipment.
Yeah, I think that's true.
But it works.
So I think he's good. I think it's sort of shocking that it's him. Mm-hmm. I think from what I understand in reading Stuart Galbraith's book is that this was another about face for their relationship, in that I think, he does these sort of quiet roles early on in things like Drunken Angel, Quiet Duel, Stray Dog, and then he kind of does and Scandal, and then he does an about face, and he does Rashomon, Idiot, and Seven Samurai, which are a little bit more extravagant performances, a little more like big. And then he turns around and does this thing, I Live in Fear, which I think is a balance between the two, but also feels like a early example by like what we would consider like the Western standards of quote unquote transformation. Like the most obvious example I can think of is, I didn't watch this movie and I never will, but there's that movie where Gary Oldman plays Winston Churchill.
Yeah.
And like, you know, he went through 4 hours of makeup every day or whatever the case was. And it feels like kind of, if this film were made now, in whatever context, that would be a source of conversation. Like Mifune utterly transforms himself. And like, it's a good performance. He's really good. I do believe that he's super old, and I don't think it's quite as scenery chewing as he is in Seven Samurai at all.
For sure, yeah. Well, I mean, also
He's
those glasses that he wears that make him look really absurd. Just,
every German critical theorist would kill for those glasses. I know one who has them.
The Adorno lenses. You just walk into Warby Parker, like, can I try on the Adorno lenses? Ah, yes, of course.
Of course you can.
Of course you can. They're a bestseller in Brooklyn.
But just remember, by getting these glasses, you're going to be insufferable at parties.
Ooh,
no one's going to want to hang out with you.
Yeah. Then, in which case, I'll just get the Foucault glasses. Ah, excellent choice.
He seems fun.
Yeah, he seems fun. He seems like he was really fun.
Do you have anything?
Actually,
do you have
Foucault
anything a little
was a lot of fun at certain parties.
That's what I've heard.
Hi-oh.
So, yeah, I think it's a good performance. I think it's really strong, and it's interestingly situated between Seven Samurai and Throne of Blood.
For sure.
But my sympathies keep coming back to the family, because I wonder, there's an implication in this film that maybe he has a lot of anxiety and a lot of fear, but the film also seems to suggest at a certain point that like maybe he doesn't really know what's going on. Case in point, the moment when the planes fly overhead. And it's entirely possible that could be subjective. And so one thing I think that is interesting about that in the context of the film is like, it's so tragic to watch that stuff happen. And on some level, it's like it sort of feels like it might be a little bit about like watching an elderly person get some kind of cognitive decline.
Yeah.
And in that case, I always feel like very sympathetic to the people who have to witness it. It's very interesting to me that the film never shows us a flashback or an earlier scene where we can sort of see Mifune's character, whose name is, to remind myself, Nakajima, Kichi Nakajima. We never see him like quote unquote well or healthy or normal.
Oh yeah. For sure. I thought you were going to say that you don't get any flashbacks to see what he experienced during the war.
Also that.
But it's funny watching it again for the second and a half time this morning. Those opening scenes hit in a different way, where you get these wide shots of, I mean, not super wide,
Japan.
But you get Japan, the city.
Tokyo specifically, I suppose.
And thinking about, and it's kind of like, almost like a godlike position, right? Looking down into the city and all these people like walking around, going to work. And to me, it resonated with like, or is that like this kind of sense of like this ominous eye that's always looking down in the city, and then it can any moment can unleash chaos and destroy it.
That's interesting, especially when you think about it in relation to this really jazzy score.
Yeah.
Which I think is really good. If I remember correctly, this was his last film with Fumio Hayazaka, who passed away while they were making the film, and it like totally devastated Kurosawa.
I thought he died. I thought he died during Seven Samurai, which is
before this. Could be misremembering, but yeah, I mean, regardless, the jazzy score,
and there's that weird, what is it, like a theremin? They're like,
yeah, I love it. It's such a good score. Yeah. It's so good, and very different from anything we've heard before this. Yeah, there is, and that comes up a little bit in when we talk about Throne of Blood, that there's no POV shots, especially in those early sequences in this film where we're looking down. Yeah, I think this film is quietly a little bit about it's about post-war Japan, and we see it resonate again and again in that we're post this like horrible moment in Japanese history, arguably in modern Japanese history, the darkest, maybe the darkest moment in all of history.
Well, yeah, it's a pretty fucking,
yeah. And traumatic, and something that like as a culture they're going to live with forever. And these films are all about the tensions inherent in like trying to rebuild a society.
I just looked it up. Is there any chance also that this is Kurosawa trying to like make a serious film about nuclear war after Godzilla? Godzilla was 1954. So like, is there any chance that he's like, well, that's kind of a silly way to allegorize or at least address that issue. I'm just going to kind of confront it directly.
Well, whether it is or it is not, I think it's interesting to think about the two disparate approaches.
Yeah, for sure.
Especially considering Shimura is in Godzilla.
Oh, he is?
Yeah, he is in Godzilla. That's correct.
God.
In the West, we've never quite gotten, I think, well, now you can, the Japanese version, because it was reshot with Raymond Burr and stuff. But Takashi Shimura in that film plays Kyohei Yamane, who it's been a very long time since I don't even know if I've seen the original Godzilla in its entirety in a I remember the 80s version and thinking that was pretty good, but I don't remember the 50s version.
It's really yeah. Sorry, go ahead.
No, I think you're absolutely right that it's definitely discussed in the Galbraith book as something that was happening around the same time.
Yeah. The Raymond Burr one's really weird too, because he's just like he's like around and he's like, I think I know who's guilty of destroying the city, and like, yeah, Mr. Mason, of course we know who it is. It's God fucking Zilla. He's right there.
It's really weird. He's really out of touch. Talk about a critique of patriarchy.
And he's like, but I have all this evidence. He's like, I think I figured out who in fact is destroying
Godzilla.
And they're like, yeah, it's that huge fucking lizard.
Did you see the lizard monster?
The lizard monster? The one shooting fire from its fucking mouth? It's him.
I think it's him.
Yeah, I think it's him.
Yes. I think it must be, if
Love?
not a direct response, but a kind of dialectical response to what we're to the trauma that you know what I mean, like a nuclear monster for sure, a monster born of like nuclear energy. I think it has to be part of it too. I think it's a strong film. It's, you know what,
it is.
So we haven't talked about the end where Shimura goes to visit Mifune, and there's a final shot, and this is hard to explain, but this is sort of really wonderfully cinematic, where Shimura is going down the stairs after having had this conversation, I should say, with Mifune, in which he is sort of questioning the nature of who's sane and who's insane. And this is interesting. There's a little bit of critique of doctors in this film in general, because they kind of are just like, yeah, he's crazy, he's up there. It's sort of similar to Akira when he's told he has like stomach problems, or he has like but they don't really address the fact that he has stomach cancer, right? Mm-hmm. There's just a little bit of like, we're seeing sort of the way that Kurosawa seems to explore the medical system. But Shimura visits Mifune. Dr. Harada visits Kichi Nakajima. He sort of questions who's crazy. And as he's going down the stairs in this terrific wide shot, Mifune, Nakajima's mistress, is coming up with the baby.
Yeah.
And it's a very loaded image. I don't know what it means. But one of the things that I think is powerful about this movie is it ends on a kind of ambiguity that seems to suggest that, like, we don't know who's right and we don't know who's wrong. There's no moralizing at the end of this film.
Yes, for sure. Yeah. And there's also that powerful line where in the cell, Mifune's character says something like the earth is burning, or the sun is, I forget exactly what it is, but this image of conflagration and of fiery death and destruction. Right.
It's also weird at the very end how Mifune turns to him and he goes, "I live in fear."
I live in fear.
And then it cuts to black. I think it's a good movie. I like this flick.
I liked it. No, I liked it too. It just, for me, it wasn't, because we just recently saw Throne of Blood and we discussed it.
Yeah, we did these in an opposite order for a variety of reasons.
But man, that film, for example, like after I was done watching, I was like, holy fucking shit, this film's a masterpiece.
Yeah,
and this film left me a little bit like, it doesn't have, to me, like it doesn't have the intimate dramatic qualities of like an Ikaru or a Stray Dog.
I don't know who needs to hear this, but different works of arts hit you differently.
Yeah, of course.
So
yeah, but also I don't know who needs to hear this. It's okay to like some movies more than other movies. It's okay to like some Led Zeppelin bands more so than other Led Zeppelin bands.
There's only one Led Zeppelin band.
Damn fucking straight. Damn fucking straight. Fell for it. Yeah. Yeah.
Before we wrap up, because this is a kind of a shorty.
That's
Go
what she
shorty. That's ooh.
said.
I'm sorry, everybody. We are with the recording of this episode. Get ready for it. George Vamp.
Liam is erotically looking up where we are in the schedule. He's erotically giggling to himself.
Fucking hate you. We are to.
We're halfway through.
We're about halfway through, give or take.
Nice.
We've recorded a little bit ahead. Nice. I think it's worth very briefly chatting, like maybe like a midpoint discussion, just briefly about like, do you feel like for you there's been certain thematic resonances between all these films? And I think it's interesting to discuss. I know that spirituality has been one, but I think also when we think about sort of our core things, which is politics and masculinity. No, I'm throwing this at you. Haven't thought it through.
Yeah, well, the intergenerational stuff seems to be coming up over and over and over again. There's also a running theme through a lot of his work about the kind of the tensions of modernity, just broadly speaking, especially about kind of thinking about the ways in which humans do or don't relate to the natural world. So it's not also a surprise that a lot of elements of kind of environmental degradation subtly come in through the film. So like I'm thinking again a lot about like the swamp in Drunken Angel that's like in the middle of the town. Obviously kind of this film as well, which suggests that one of the horrors about nuclear war isn't just kind of the destruction of everybody, but about like radioactive fallout and what that does to the natural world. And obviously you see a little bit of this obviously plays out like in Throne of Blood too. So yeah, I mean, I think there's like a lot of those themes like keep coming up, and those are the things that I keep like looking for and keep finding, and that are really resonating with me.
Yeah, I think that's all good. I think also those sort of commingle between spirituality and politics. Like I think that like any great filmmaker, it's an interesting thing because filmmaking like this, narrative filmmaking, is all storytelling. And it's been interesting to watch these films become, and the style become more confident throughout. And so what is interesting to me is when you watch a film like, which we're releasing this episode before, but Throne of Blood, I think, is his most visually precise and visually rich film. That's not to say the others aren't, but there's like sequences in that movie that almost do what language in Shakespeare does visually. Yeah. He strips all this, the moments with before Wasiju murders murders the King Duncan analog, for example, that suggest everything about the story within the frame, as opposed to him saying something like, "Is this a dagger I see before me?" or whatever the case might be. It doesn't need the language. It's so visually rich. And so it's interesting how these thematic concerns keep coming out, but I think it's very fascinating to me that there is no Kurosawa is able to make all these salient points or call to mind all these things about the environment, about politics, about living in the 20th century entirely through visual imagery and storytelling. Yeah. And that's no underrated quality, because I think in contemporary filmmaking, there is a need to, in some cases, clearly elucidate what your movie is about.
For sure. Yeah, very good. There's a visual clarity in his films.
Yes.
That is hard, I think, to replicate, and also it seems very seamless and effortless, but it's intensely difficult to pull off.
I think also one thing that's come up a lot with these films is that, or with some of our conversations about these films, is that particularly in the 50s, let's say from Scandal on, there is a recurrence of conversation about Ingmar Bergman. And then and I mean Bergman. I love Ingmar Bergman's films. I haven't seen them all, but every single Ingmar Bergman film I've seen, I love. Persona is one of my favorite films of all time.
Yeah, is amazing.
And he seems to be in the league of great directors who can suggest interiority through visual storytelling. And a couple of people I think of when I think about that is Ingmar Bergman, Akira Kurosawa, and I think because we associate him so closely culturally with samurai films that we forget that he was so much more superficially than an action director. Or the guy that influenced Star Wars, or whatever the case might be. Yeah. And this has been such like a rich rediscovery of like the power of the medium and its relative, and when it was starting to become what it is now. Like you can actually draw a line between these films and, for better or for worse, superhero movies. Like the modernity and the ability to like create these complex visual images and the sound mixing and the studio production, like they're very, very, very rich films.
For sure. Yeah. Watch them.
It's just, they're fucking rule. They're so good. Like it's almost like we spent last season like running through a briar patch and like getting all sorts of cuts, and this season we're just putting ointment all over our cuts.
Erotically putting ointment all over our erotic
I don't know how to
cuts.
express it, but it's a hard.
No, you're right. Yeah,
it's hard.
There's a panacea, or there's like it's good. It's good. See, again, it's not to be like a snob, but it's good to like sometimes just sit back and take in like art house films like this, and also just because like so many of these films are just. They might be like art house, but they're just so fucking enjoyable. Like The Seven Samurai is just a banger. Fucking Throne of Blood is just a banger.
Yeah,
they're just
Rashomon is a banger.
Rashomon's a banger.
I also think, to that point, it's also interesting to think about this in the big picture in terms of what we've talked. Like, our first season on John Cassavetes, available now. That was a Durance test sometimes. They're great films, but they're hard to watch. They don't offer the simple pleasures that, like, a Love Streams, which is, I think, monumental achievement.
Yeah.
Does not offer the simple pleasures that, like, watching Mifune kick fucking ass in Seven Samurai does. In the same sense, it's a harder commitment.
Yeah, that's Seven Samurai is legitimately like an action film.
Yeah, I'm just saying that like these films have met more than anything. I mean, I think that these films have met in the middle of like a total and visceral enjoyment with like an intellectual core. And I think one thing that's been interesting along with that is exploring like the complexity of what I think are Akira Kurosawa's politics.
Right. I would say, though, I would assume that the two people that listen to this podcast are already on that boat with us, in the sense that just because something is in black and white, just because something hits like the 2.5 hour mark, does not necessarily mean that it's a chore to watch it.
Have you had like a favorite? So 2 questions. Has there been something you've gone back to and been like, holy shit, this movie rules? Like one in particular. And has there been any like new discovery for you that you were like, wow?
Throne of Blood was the one I went back to, and I was like, this so far is my favorite. The one that I saw for the first time that I was like, I maybe The Idiot. Now, I mean, it's the first one that comes to mind.
Yeah, The Idiot like kind of is a revelation of a movie because there's nothing else in his oeuvre that is quite so powerful.
It's weird, yeah. It's fucking weird.
It's really weird. And also, a nice byproduct of this season has been watching 2 killer Setsuko Hara films.
Yeah.
And she's so good. There we go. That's it.
We did it.
Anything else we want to say?
Just very quickly, I remember this interesting Kubrick quote about Doctor Strangelove where he said I think it was him. He said the one comforting thing about...
Do it in the accent.
Kubrick's accent? What would that be?
He's from the Bronx. I don't know. I'm just joking. I don't know.
As a kid, he's from actually.
Do your great Stanley Kubrick impression.
He never really developed an English accent.
The only thing I can think of hearing his voice is when he's in that clip where he's a total asshole to Shelley Duvall making The Shining, where he's like, "Everyone's waiting on you, Shelley," and you're like, "Jesus."
He terrorized her. Did you see those the screenshots from David Lynch's Master Class, where he's like, I don't understand these people that terrorize other people on set. He's like, we're making movies. Like, life is good. Like, why would you make somebody else feel terrible?
Yeah. Well, I think that I wonder if there's going to be some sort of conversation that's not a critical, but a reappraisal of some of Kubrick's approaches.
Well, yeah, it happened. It was that terrible article about like the problem with Stanley Kubrick is that he doesn't understand male toxic masculinity. Like, are you out of your fucking mind? Have you watched any of the films? Anyway, he said that in relation to Doctor Strangelove and the Nuclear War, that the one good thing or the one solace that exists in nuclear war is that everybody goes with you. So
wow, that suggests a real fear of FOMO.
Right, well, but it also is the sense of like, well, once I'm dead, the world keeps going on, but not if there's a nuclear war.
Yay! Dark.
Yeah.
Oof. So
on that light
note, where are we here? Okay. Next up on the podcast, Throne of Blood.
Throne of Blood
with Isaac Butler.
With Throne of Butler, Isaac Butler.
Throne of Butler, Isaac Butler. Isaac is a writer, director, theater maker. He wrote a book called The World Only Spins Forward, which is about angels in America. And he's writing a book about the method, which I'm super psyched to read. That sounds so good. And is a prolific tweeterer. He's got a great Twitter presence, knows a lot about Shakespeare, knows a lot about theater. And also... Jesus, doing so much stuff. Co-hosts the Working podcast on Slate, which is very good. Yeah, and he had the director of Sneakers on, which made me want to go back and rewatch Sneakers.
Such a good movie.
It's so good, man. It's so good. You know, the guy that directed Sneakers, you know what other movie he directed?
Conan the Barbarian.
The Sum of All Fears.
Damn. Not his best work.
Movie.
Not his best work.
Where's your essay on that, bruh?
Well, I think I'm just going to do that. We'll talk about it. But
okay,
yeah.
I don't know. I'm bringing this up on the air. Okay, please. We got a Patreon. We did an episode on Ben Affleck. We're gonna drop some more stuff. I dropped a review of Tenet recently. Tenet, more like a story of how I saw Tenet, of audio essay by
an
Liam
erotically
Willingham,
charged film review.
Third grade. I'm doing a child's voice. You. Oh, also, I wanted to plug our old friend Michael Carroll.
Yes,
has a podcast now. I'm on the first episode. I've told him he has to get George on it. The name of the show is Judgment Pod T2 versus Cinema, which I think is an amazing concept where where guests choose 3 films and decide if they're better or worse than Terminator 2 Judgment Day. He had our buddy Annie Rose Malamet on. It's good. It's very Michael. If you know Michael, it's very Michael.
He's great.
Sort of ornery. Yeah, it's good. But who cares about him? Fuck that guy. Rate, review, and subscribe to our podcast if you haven't already. Patreon.com/Oeuvre Busters if you want to throw us $3 a month for an extra essay by George Mad Dog Fragopoulos. And I'm also on there sometimes doing stuff. It's going to be great. Thank you very much for listening. I was Liam Billingham.
I'm George, living in fear, Fragopoulos.
And this was Oeuvre Busters, or
a record
of 2 beta males. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Mic drop.
Mic drop.
Bye.